Hi everyone, welcome to Book Talk for the Basic and Transitional Studies program here at Seattle Central. I'm Ann Levine and this is Rebecca Boon. Thank you for being here today.
I'm happy to be here.
Today we're going to talk about Because of Winn-Dixie by Kate DiCamillo. Just a fabulous book.
It is fabulous.
Now I've used this with younger learners and it was a success, but I'd like to hear about your experience using this with your 4B class.
4B,
Yes.
yeah, reading and writing.
Great. And before we do that, could you give us a brief summary of it?
Sure. It's about a little girl, Opal. She's 10 years old, and she and her father just moved to Naomi, Florida, and she doesn't have a mother. And she's lonely in this new place, and very soon into the book she meets a dog, Winn-Dixie, and then her life starts to shift, and through this relationship with her dog, she ends up meeting people and forming new relationships in the community, and community people meet each other, and her relationship, it's a story about, I think, maturity and forming relationships.
Through those universal themes, for those reasons, do you feel that it's appropriate for adult learners?
I do. This book has adult themes throughout it. There's alcoholism in the book, there's war, there's parental abandonment, there's sorrow, loneliness, regret, there's getting arrested for doing something. So there are a lot of adult themes in the book.
And how did you engage our English language learners? I mean, how did you activate their prior knowledge?
Well, I thought about what would be the things about place and people that would be helpful for them. So I started out showing a map of the United States and looking at Florida, and because that's where she lives, and how Florida relates to the rest of the United States, where it's located, climate, demographics of the area. And then also Civil War. It comes up in this book. The librarian's great-grandfather goes to war, to the Civil War. So I showed some information about the Civil War and how Florida is in the southern part of the United States, the whole Yankee-Confederate difference. So that when they read that part, when they read, they would know that the grandfather was on the side of the Confederacy. And that's about what I kind of stopped there with pre-reading information.
And how did you keep the students connected to the different themes throughout the novel?
Well, a couple of things. They read 3 chapters at a time, and I always developed a set of comprehension questions, which basically started from a book of teacher materials that the teachers have access to. But some of the questions were surface level questions, like, what color was his car? And I wanted to get students more familiar with reflective questions, or questions where they had to go deeper, they had to go back in the book and think about it. But there were so many great themes in this book that it wasn't hard for me to keep them interested. I would come in and say, so have you read the part about da-da-da-da? And of course, many students would say, yes, and I'd say, well, what page was that on, And students would, I loved this, that so many students picked up their book and they were looking, page 67, and then I'd say, why did he say that? And they'd be looking again, and the student would say, oh, well, on page 84, they would start engaging that way, like with the book as a physical thing, and also just getting to know at what point in the book things happen.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Can you give us an example of a topic that really engaged the students, that sparked discussion?
Yes. At one point in the book, Opal approaches her father, whom she calls the preacher, because there's a little bit of distance, in a sense, between Opal and her father in the beginning. She approaches him and says, Winn-Dixie agrees with me that you should tell me 10 things about my mama. Her mother had abandoned her, and she was wondering so much about her mother. And she had wondered but not asked. And Winn-Dixie agreed with her that she should ask. One thing for every year I've been born. And the students really liked that part of the book and wanted to talk about it a lot. the 10 things were a combination of things that a child would like, oh, she had red hair just like me. But also some adults could relate when the preacher was trying to find a way to tell her that her mother was an alcoholic, for example. And students just were very empowered by that part.
So I imagine that some of these great classroom discussions sparked topics for writing extension activities. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Well, in terms of discussion sparking that, one of the things that I did was ask the students to think about the characters in the book. This was later on, when we met a lot of the characters and talked a lot about sadness and challenges that all the characters had. I thought about how we could write the paragraph, since paragraph development is part of 4B, reading and writing. We talked as a group about the main characters and what might be in common, they might all have in common, and we agreed that sadness was a common theme for all the characters, including Winn-Dixie the dog. So we came up with a topic sentence as a class. All of the characters in this book, because of Winn-Dixie, were sad. For example, comma. And I asked them to copy our agreed upon topic sentence, and then they all could write, they ended up with different paragraphs about, for example, Otis was sad because da-da-da-da-da. Winn-Dixie was sad because da-da-da-da-da. And so that was a great extension and also helped build in another one of the standards for me. And early on, I realized that this was a great book for past tense. It's written in past tense, and so I made up a worksheet that has a place for regular verbs that students could find in the book and irregular. I asked them to read the first 2 chapters and to copy the verbs they could find in each category. And then I asked them to look at a page in our other grammar textbook that has an introduction to irregular past verbs, some of the more common words. And what the students found out right away, they discovered that many of these irregular verbs were in the first 2 chapters of this book, which was so empowering that, wow, we've only read 2 chapters and it's covering all these verbs that my grammar textbook includes. And then after they discovered that, I had 6 questions where the answer, you would need to use the past tense version of some of these verbs from the book.
Oh, that's something positive about textbooks, right?
Yes, the students right away could see, wow, this book that I'm reading is going to help me with the grammar structures in my class.
So if you were to use this again, or when you use it again, how will you do it differently?
I don't know. I mean, I think that I might, what I like about this book is there are so many different themes to explore that I would have to discover how I would use it based on the students in the class. This quarter, students tended to want to talk about the sorrow in the book and the new friendships and love relationships that formed.
And wasn't it interesting, the sorrow? It was kind of a combination of happiness and sorrow.
Yeah, it was.
Continue.
Okay, well, and so that was another thing that, that's another reason I like this book so much, is that with every storyline, there are different viewpoints. You can see, because even with alcoholism, Opal's mother was an alcoholic, and Gloria had a challenge with alcoholism, but Gloria's whole story is such a different experience and viewpoint. Gloria's done a lot of self-forgiveness, where Opal's mama was sort of thinking, couldn't get a handle on that, and couldn't get over that part, you know. And so yeah, it's very complicated, and it's a children's book, and yet it's very interesting to adults.
Right. Thank you, Rebecca, for joining us today on Book Talk, our first episode. We hope that you'll join us next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jacquie George, for camera and et cetera, blah, 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 blah.
You're welcome.